So in Module 2, we'll be focusing on working with data storage. Chris, tell me more about that. I know this is really talking about the capabilities we had with data storage on Azure.
Yeah, so we have 4 lessons. Fundamentally, what we're looking at here is the difference between Azure storage accounts and Data Lake Storage Gen 2.
Okay.
Azure storage accounts basically is in lesson 2, and Data Lake Gen 2 storage is in lesson 3 and 4. But before we go into any of them, we're just looking at a general data storage approach in Azure.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah, sure. So with the general, choosing a data storage approach in Azure, basically there's 2 objectives here. What is the benefit of you storing your data in Azure? To be honest, again, it's just a reaffirmation of what's in Azure fundamentals. And then just a comparison between Azure data storage with on-premises storage as well. I don't think there's anything to drill down into there. I mean, what we've presented this slide on really is just a bullet pointed list really of the capabilities and really just a descriptive comparison between on-premises storage and the cloud. So again,
yeah, this kind of sounds really basic to me,
Exactly,
kind of like a recap of Azure fundamentals.
And we're saying it's basic though, but you've got to remember, we're viewing the audience as our Microsoft certified trainers, so we know that you guys have more knowledge than your students. So please don't take us saying that it's basic. We're saying that it's basic for Microsoft certified trainers. This could be very confusing to a student, right?
Yep.
Especially if they've never done this before. So I just want to put across that we're not assuming too much here.
And then what's going to be even more confusing is the difference between storage account, data lake store, right?
Absolutely, but that's the whole point of this module, right? And after the review questions here, we basically go into lesson 2, where we look at creating an Azure storage account. In creating an Azure storage account, there's 4 lesson objectives, right?
Yep.
For me, I think it's it's objective 3 that's really important, the account creation tool of choice.
Okay.
But we're going to describe the various storage accounts, the appropriate settings for each of the storage accounts, and we give an example of creating a storage account in the Azure portal.
Yeah, but so, I mean, I think this is an interesting module because the way I think about it is like, we're talking about creating a storage account. Okay. Isn't the key takeaway from this module data lake store and what to do with it?
Yeah, but how can you understand data lake store if you don't know how it's different to storage accounts?
Okay.
Because fundamentally the implementation is the same apart from one checkbox item. And that's the thing that confuses people, right? People get confused by the fact, well, is data lake storage Gen 2, it's Azure Blob, is it? Well, actually, you're using Azure Blob to create it.
Okay, that's going to require some clarification. So,
Exactly.
So tell me more.
So, first of all, be clear on what storage accounts are, right? And make the distinction that there's blob, files, queues, and Azure table storage, right?
Yep.
And why you will use it. Data diversity, cost sensitivity, and management overheads.
Yep.
Right? From there, you can look at creating it. Okay? Very simple. You might actually, whenever you see a slide with an image of a screenshot, go ahead and demo it yourself. Because at the end of the day, to actually create a storage account is very, very quick.
Yeah. If it didn't change, right? The interface might change, might be a little bit off from the screenshot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the storage account creation tools, you've just maybe given a demo in the Azure portal, but, there may be people in the room who are into, PowerShell, tell them that they can do it in PowerShell. Tell them that they can do it in command line interface.
Yeah, I'm getting cold feet here because I go now, well, my objective is to become a data engineer.
Yeah.
How does this PowerShell command line interface, how prominent is that with relationship to the exam? In
relationship to the exam, there's not much in there, to be fair.
I hope not.
But with the certificate, but with the training, we've got to get that fine balance between meeting certification objectives and living in the real world.
Scaling versus skill validation.
Exactly. Skill. That's brilliant. Skilling versus skill validation. That's exactly the point, right?
Okay.
And the reality is, When you're new to this, you are likely to use the Azure portal.
Yeah.
But the more you use the Azure portal, you think, well, how can I speed this up?
Yeah.
And that's how we live in the real world.
Okay.
But
Cool.
it's also really important in the creation of a storage account, you can't query this data.
Yeah. Okay.
You really can't query it. If you want to query the data that's in a storage account, you have to process it in some way. You have to take it somewhere. Well, this is a key decision point, right? Maybe you don't want to. Maybe you just want to use a storage account for archival purposes.
And then maybe like later on enable it for some kind of batch processing over that storage?
Well, think about it, right? What is the reason for keeping data, right? You're wanting to keep data for two reasons. Primarily, you legally have to keep it. That's the main driver. But more and more today, because the cost of storage is so cheap, you're thinking, well, if I keep it, maybe I can use that to get deeper insights about my organization.
At some point in time.
Exactly. But do you really want to store that in the most expensive storage, going if you're not actually using it?
Yep.
Probably not.
Yep.
So storage accounts, and blob storage in particular, is really, really good for cheap storage for data that's not hot. It's relatively cold.
Okay. Then would I be able to later on take and say like, hey, turn this blob storage into a data lake?
Well, yes, you can do that. But what I would actually say is you need to make a decision early on in the process as, you know, which of the, what data am I going to be using as cold storage? Which data am I going to be using as processing? So rather than say converting a storage account, what you're going to do is you're going to create a data lake store and you're going to create blob store and you'll have them there in place, which is what basically leads us on to the next lesson, where we're looking at Azure Data Lake Storage. And the thing is with Azure Data Lake Storage, we've got 5 objectives here, explaining what it is, how you can create it. But what's really important is comparing it with Azure Blob Storage.
There's been a shift from data lake store first generation to Gen 2.
Yes.
What do I need to know about that as an MCT if I prepare to teach this?
Yeah, so this is where this lesson will cover that, right? So once we understand the differences, we can explore the stages here and describe use cases for it.
Yep.
So, you know, Hadoop access, security, performance, and redundancy is the key benefits of the Data Lake Storage Generation 2. We're getting the best of Data Lake Gen 1 and Azure Blob coming together.
Yep.
And it gives us these capabilities, right?
How much do I need to know about Data Lake Gen 1 as a trainer versus... Yeah, okay.
You don't, right? What you do need to know is what's highlighted in red here.
Okay.
To create a Data Lake Store Gen 2 using the portal is exactly the same as creating an Azure Blob with one difference. You've got to go to the Advanced tab and enable hierarchical namespace.
I see.
So your question was, what does the trainer need to know is the fundamental difference? It's that Azure Blob is a flat namespace and Data Lake Store Gen 2 is a hierarchical namespace, which means it can organize the data, which means it can traverse it, which means that it's queryable.
Perfect. Cool.
So that's where we make the distinction actually in this next slide. Flat namespace versus hierarchical namespace and the fact that you can traverse that namespace itself.
Makes sense.
How do we process that data using Azure Data Lake Store? You ingest it, so you need to find some mechanism to ingest it. We cover that in later modules.
Yep, could be Databricks.
It could be Databricks. It could be Azure Data Factory. You've got a number of different choices. The storage, of course, is Azure Data Lake Store. But what do you do then? You prepare it. Now, in a data science, you'll train it. And then you'll build models and serve it. But Data Lake is helping in other scenarios as well. It's not just there to serve data science solutions. I could use the same data in a Data Lake Store as the source to a data warehouse.
This is exciting.
It is, because it provides us in a world that we always had problems with in the past. Because when we were building BI solutions in the past, it was very cost prohibitive to do that because you had to buy all the additional hardware to facilitate that, and then a customer would go, we didn't budget for that. With this, we've now got the scale and the facilities in Azure to bring about that capability.
Cool.
And here are the big data use cases. Modern data warehousing.
That's important.
It is, because maybe I should be pausing here because I'm talking about things in the slide before. So, folks, I'm going to slow down, right? Because the point exactly I was making on the previous slide was, the store. And the Data Lake Store Gen 2 could be used to serve up data to a modern data warehouse.
It's so funny you mentioned like you're going to slow down, and I'm sitting here like, feed me, this is exciting.
Well,
right?
let's hope that it's beneficial for the MCTs and the Azure technical trainers as well. So advanced analytics, we could use the data from Data Lake Store to feed Databricks real-time analytics. We could use this as a basis to go into Stream Analytics or maybe Kafka. The choice is yours.
Okay.
Again, the review questions, which I'm not going through. And then finally in Module 4, well, you've got a Data Lake Store.
That's where it
How
real.
do we upload data into it? And there's 3 objectives here. You can do it using PowerShell, Storage Explorer, and you may get customers who are currently using Data Lake Store Generation 1, and they want to move to Data Lake Store Generation 2 to take advantage of all the capabilities that are there as well. And I think
Should I have expected to see Data Factory here?
No, but, it would be unrealistic to not call it out at the Data Lake Store. It's kind of like, you've got to acknowledge that it's part of that movement, right?
Okay,
So with PowerShell, here's an example of the code that you could use to create the storage account. Here's an example of Azure Storage Explorer. Again, if you see stuff like this, feel free to use your own demos and examples to build this out. And then Azure Data Factory. I would recommend that you don't demonstrate Azure Data Factory at this point, really, because we got an entire module on it. But like I was saying, you've got to acknowledge that this exists because it's likely that you might get a student on there going, hey, we're using Data Lake Store Gen 1. How can we take advantage of it? Well, actually, we have a wizard in Azure Data Factory that
makes sense.
Yeah.
Good points.
So again, review questions, and then the lab. Really, it seems so simple, the lab, in some ways, but it's so important in others. It's simple in that they are going to basically, in the lab objectives, use the case study to choose a data storage approach in Azure. And in the case study, the Azure website will use Azure Blob to store images that are going to be used on the website. And to fulfill a data science requirement within the case study, they're going to use Data Lake Storage Gen 2.
Okay.
So it's simple to set up, but it's at the heart of the solution, right? So basically, the lab scenario lays out, a more specific information related to the case study that allows them to drill down. And within that, you've got a lab review. Is why did you select the option that you selected to store the image files?
That makes sense.
And that's getting back to the heart of the difference between you can't query Azure Blob directly. Yeah. And then apart from the Azure portal, are there other methods that you could use to automate the deployment of storage accounts? So you're thinking about that.
Okay.
It's about having open questions.
Okay. That's clear to me.
Module summary. You're just recapping on what you did, but I do like this video with James Baker and Laura Rebelke, which is really good to watch. So I would highly recommend that you watch that video before you get them to watch it. It's about 16 minutes long.
Okay, perfect. This was clear.
Good.
Next module. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.